Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. The title for this one-hour broadcast is World Watchers. It is program number 799, March the 30th, 1987. I read in the San Francisco Chronicle yesterday the itinerary of the Pope visiting Argentina and Chile, and visit number 14 on his trip is a fairly small town in Argentina called Mendoza. I never was aware of the town of Mendoza, to tell you the truth, until the news account on CNN February the 20th, 1987, according to CNN, stated that Adolf Hitler had been buried in Mendoza a month earlier, January of 87. The same news account said that Eva Braun was still alive. I had that on broadcast number 794, February the 23rd of this year, of course. The cemetery is in Palmiro, 30 miles east of Mendoza. The same day that report came out over CNN, the San Jose Mercury had an account of a scientific convention in Canada, in Ontario, Canada, where one of the papers presented was a discussion of many years' research on the dental records of Adolf Hitler that said the dental records that the Soviet Union had when they got a body out of the ashes in the bunker, buried in the bunker, was not that of Adolf Hitler, and the convention scientist, when presenting the paper, gave his reasons for having that opinion, and I had that on the air. Now, how strange is it that Karol Wojtyla, the Pope, is visiting Mendoza? Is this just a coincidence that was planned a long time ago, or does it have any symbolic references for people who know what's going on, as many people in Argentina talked and discussed the fact that Adolf Hitler had been alive? Now, think about the fact that Pope John Paul II, worked at Auschwitz during the war, during the extermination periods. He worked for IG Farben, a subsidiary of called Solvay Chemical. Farben supplied all the Zyklon B and poison gas for Auschwitz overseas. When the chemist who made the Zyklon B, Otto Ambros, was released as a Nuremberg criminal, he was brought to the United States by none other than J. Peter Grace. Grace, of course, is active in the AFL-CIO organization throughout Central and South America that has recently been linked to Oliver North to Project Democracy, the National Endowment for Democracy. So J. Peter Grace is not far from the Reagan administration with his suggestions on cutting costs. And also, Otto Ambros was brought here by J. Peter Grace. So they evidently didn't consider these ovens and the killing of many, many millions of people to be a very serious crime. He was rewarded for that. Now, Grace is on the board of AmeriCare's foundation with headquarters in New Canaan, Connecticut, with William Simon. And the bulk of this program is going to be on accuracy in media. William Simon is also on the board of Accuracy in Media, as is Prescott Bush, who Simon and Bush are both Knights of Malta from the Vatican, and Bush is the brother of the former CIA director and currently the vice president, who has long links down to people in Bolivia, Central America, connected to Klaus Barbie, the notorious Barbie, and Licio Gelli, who provide the rat line for people like Barbie, got it through the Vatican. So how far away is the Vatican from a lot of Nazis or this particular Pope? Paul Marcinkus is wanted by the Italian government for money that's missing out of the Vatican Bank. They gave promissory notes for $1.2 billion that were put in 10 dummy fronts in Panama. And this money was used for the P2, the Masonic Lodge, headed by Licio Gelli, who was of the Waffen-SS, the Gestapo, who built the rat line for people like Barbie and maybe 30,000 or more top Nazis to leave Europe by way of the Vatican. Gelli has worked closely with Francesco Pazienza and Michael Ledeen. Pazienza is on trial in Italy now for the Bologna bombing, and I read an article last week that he may at his trial bring up the name of Alexander Haig and Michael Ledeen, who are very much in the news now. When the Banco Ambrosiano scandal broke, the P2 story broke, what did the Pope do? The Pope from Solvay Chemical from Auschwitz. He called in Hermann from Germany to help the Vatican Bank. Hermann Abst was president of the Deutsche Bank. He's still active there. He was president of it during World War II. Deutsche Bank wrote the salary for the Waffen-SS for Adolf Hitler for the Gestapo, and he also was a major board member of IG Farben. So would it be far-fetched if these people knew that Adolf Hitler actually was living in Chile, Argentina, Antarctica, and that he was buried finally, and the Pope is going to go through Mendoza? Is there some little joke that we don't know, because there are strong links of this Pope to Adolf Hitler, to Hermann Abst, to IG Farben, and to SS Himmler, the head of the Gestapo, who worked with Allen Dulles of the OSS and provided a way for these Nazis to leave this country. Now, a lot of people ask me on the talk show part of my program, those of you who subscribe to World Watchers get this 1-hour tape, and many of you know that afterwards I have 1 hour of talk show, and people have called in, is there any good news? How come you only talk about bad news? Well, there's some very interesting good news today, and it's been taking place for the last few weeks, and I'll share it with you. One is the fact that Francesco Pazienza, behind the Bologna bombing with his links to the P2 and the Vatican, is in a jail in Italy waiting trial for that bombing, murder, and of course he links to the Central Intelligence Agency and to the United States. Reverend Potter Gale is in jail. He was arrested in Las Vegas. He was founder of the Ministry of Christ. He's a leader of the Identity Movement. He is part of an organization that wants to cut the throats of every black and Jew in the United States, a miserable terrorist with roots going back to World War II and training with the Philippine guerrillas and coming to the United States and setting up a lot of racist organizations and plans here. Reverend Potter Gale is in jail, and Pazienza is in jail. Franklin Camper, the man who runs a terrorist camp in Alabama, who's worked with top Nazis and Klan, has been under trial for a fire bombing at of a home out in San Bernardino. He got off the first time. One member of the jury refused to budge, and they retried it. These were nursery school teachers whose homes were bombed. The car were bombed, and he came to California to set up the people who would do it. And Franklin Camper is most noted for training the Sikhs who are linked to the Air India crash where so many killed, and to the Air India in Japan where several people were killed in the locker room there. Now, Juan Perón's interior minister, Juan Lopez Rega, has been, I don't know if he's under house arrest. He was picked up in Miami, and he was sent to Argentina. He's headed up the 3A death squads that worked with all of these people that I've mentioned, and set death squads into Central America to train the rebels to fight the Sandinistas and to help this El Salvadorian government put down the rebels there caught wanting a revolution. Now, another partner in crime, the sixth partner in crime of all this, was just arrested, and that was in the paper today. So some tremendous changes are taking place. The man's name is familiar to those who are listening to World Watchers for a long time. It's Stefano Delle Chaiae. And this is the way the story went in our Monterey Herald. Most of you have seen it in your newspapers, I hope. Caracas, Venezuela. Special agents arrested Stefano Delle Chaiae, an Italian neo-fascist charged with the bombing death of more than 100 people in Italy. The security police announced yesterday in Venezuela. Delle Chaiae has been a fugitive for 17. He's one of the world's most wanted men. He will be sent back to Italy today. He was arrested in a Caracas neighborhood where he apparently lived for the past 3 years, and he also was in Peru. He fled to Peru after Klaus Barbie was picked up and sent to France and was arrested. Our security agents had been alerted that Delle Chaiae had fled Bolivia, which indeed he did in 1983. When they went to the house, he tried to escape through a back door, but they caught him, and he congratulated them politely. He said it was the first time he had been caught. Delle Chaiae, 49, used more than 20 aliases. He fled Italy in 1970, entered Venezuela in 1984. You see, after Barbie was taken to to France, pardon me. He had a Bolivian passport. Papers in the apartment, and this is the interesting part of this, included lists of drug traffickers, Italian neo-fascist literature, and a list of extreme rightists of Venezuela. Now, the extreme rightists of Venezuela linked to the Medellin cartel and to the Contras and those persons on trial now, defendants in the Christic Institute trial. And I wonder if I know the powers that be have known where Delle is for a long time, and I wonder if they had to pick him up to get rid of these lists that he was using or bargaining or blackmailing for. So it's necessary now to call an end to the game now that Mr. Leder Rivas has been arrested, the head of the Colombia cocaine cartel. This whole group from South America and Colombia link right up to Central America into Washington, D.C., into Florida and Washington and New York. And I think that they had to put the clamp on Delle, because if he has the list of drug traffickers, the Italian fascists, and the Italian extremists in Venezuela, then he also has the list of the Medellin cartel. And I'll do more about that, hopefully in the weeks to come, because that again links to Merrill Lynch and Don Reagan's offices and E.F. Hutton. Now, Delle fled Italy in 1970. He was accused of involvement in 1969 in the bombing in Milan of the Banco Nazionale d'Agricoltura. The blast killed 16 people, wounded 100. The case remained unsolved. He's wanted on other terrorism cases, 2 unsuccessful coup plots in 1970 and 73. Now, these were planned by NATO, by Richard Nixon's team, Michele Sindona when Nixon was president, and the United States CIA was planning a coup in Italy in 1970 that also involved Prince Borghese, who is on the board of Permandex, the operation that was behind the murder of John Kennedy and many, many other people. And Stefano Delle is wanted in that coup plot. But again, I believe they had to pick him up because he links directly to James Angleton and Prince Borghese, and we're getting awfully close to the smoking gun of who killed John Kennedy when these kinds of people are around, and I think it was necessary to pull him in. He's wanted for a train bombing in August of 74, for the murder of an Italian judge, Vittorio Occorso, in 1976. In the 1960s, Delle founded the National Avant-Garde, an extreme right-wing group. He's been described as the uncontested leader of neo-fascism in Rome. Now, he never would have been the uncontested if he didn't have the CIA money that came out of Otto Skorzeny's pockets, Adolf Hitler's money that was released from the banks and safe deposits put in the hands of Otto Skorzeny in Madrid, and that, of course, that office was a part of our Central Intelligence Agency office. In the Rebel magazine, the first issue that I wrote on the Nazis and the links to the Kennedy assassination, it goes into Skorzeny and the offices in Madrid. Delle is believed to have ties with Licio Gelli. You better believe that. The fugitive head of the secret Masonic Lodge Propaganda Dewey. And that again connects to Henry Kissinger and Michael Ledeen and Francesco Pazienza. It says the Italian authorities said it was a criminal organization. Gelli and former intelligence officer General Pietro Musumeci and Colonel Giuseppe Bellomonte are on trial for the Bologna bombing. And, of course, they set up that Super Sesame, which is the secret government inside of the Italian intelligence, which is identical to the operation that William Casey had Oliver North running inside the National Security Council, with the same people running our secret government that were assisting the Italian government at the same time. So with all of Contragate coming down and computers or safes maybe being tapped, and goodness knows what the Tower report found, the Tower Commission found, Stephanie Delle has been brought in. Now, there are 2 very good books on this subject, this tangled web, because I'm just giving you a quick overview. One is called Stefano Delle, written by Stuart Christie. I believe you can get it from Tom Davis at Research in Aptos. He has this book. It was published in London in 1984, and it begins right off the bat with James Angleton and Mr. Borghese, Prince Borghese, which are the direct connections to Permandex and to the murder of John Kennedy. The other book that is an excellent source of the material for these various people that I've listed, those 6 that are being apprehended now, or 5 of the 6. The book is The Great Heron Coup that I've referred to many times, published in 1980, written by Henry Kruger, published by Southend Press, and again, Tom Davis has those books. Those 2 are very, very important. to understand the subtleties of the trial going on now, the Bologna trial, Mr. Pazienza locked up, Alexander Haig wanting to run for president, Stefano Delle being arrested and deported back to Italy. It all adds up to a nest of fascism that has been affecting countries in South Central America. These particular people also have influences in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, but more than that area, it's Central and South America, which is predominantly Catholic and was probably 99% Catholic, and which is controlled very much by the Vatican and the drug traffic and the terrorism, the death squads that hold together to keep the government running the way that certain powers that be think it should be running. Now, I'm not going to do much this week I'm not going to do hardly anything on the warfare between the evangelists. I'll do more later, but I want to get to accuracy in media, so I'll just pass this off right now. This Jessica Hahn was put down by one night of adultery, and I'm sure most of you are seeing what is happening. Interestingly enough, she came from West Babylon and went down to South Babylon in Florida. She was fixed up with persons who wanted, obviously, to get Jim Baker, and they made tapes of their love affair, whatever it was. This wasn't the kind of thing where he sees a cute girl at the bar, has an indiscretion, and he separated from his wife. This was taped identical to Chappaquiddick or what Tony Lasowitz did and confessed to doing at the time of Watergate. Goodness knows where he is now. In 1969, he was on the island of Chappaquiddick. But this kind of blackmail and extortion and taking over the Baker Empire smacks of a real Chappaquiddick affair. She says she was drugged. I'm sure he was drugged, and the cameras were rolling, and then he builds up his empire, and then all of a sudden it falls. And there is Jimmy Swaggart and Jerry Falwell enjoying every minute of it. Jimmy Swaggart said yesterday at his church services that it's taken the minister's sexual indiscretion to get the press interested in evangelical ministry. If the news media got as excited as it has in the last 2 weeks, think what it is going to do when the trumpet sounds and every child of the living God gets up and leaves this world. Now, those are the kind of people you're talking about, the Armageddon mentality. These children are all going to die and go to heaven and leave this world, and he thinks this is just a glorious example of something coming down that illustrates the beauty of sacrificing to God, and the children will leave this world. These are very, very sick people. Now, the Tower Report, I don't know how many of you have it. It's really an amazing book. I never expected it to be so good. Forget what they left out or who they were. It has a lot of material in it. And among other things, they had a list of right-wing organizations that form these interlocking networks, and it will take years for students of history to appreciate the clues that are located in this one book. And many, many books and articles will come out. There's the National Endowment for the Preservation of Liberty, CAUSA, Reverend Moon's Church, which I mentioned on World Watchers, that hasn't even made a ripple or come to the surface yet, the National Defense Council, the American Conservative Trust, the Institute for Democracy, Western Goals. Now, you just take Western Goals and CAUSA alone, and you interlock into organizations such as Accuracy in Media. Read Irvine's Accuracy in Media. You lock into the Japanese mafia, Ryoshi Sasakawa, and the armament people ready for war, World War III, arming and not only using religious fronts, tax-free religious fronts like Moon, but very serious projects in South America and throughout the entire world under the organization of Moon's Church. And Western Goals is the epitome of their using police department computers tapped into Western Goals to take information about law-abiding citizens for the day that they have to be rounded up. Now, Nation magazine has a brilliant article by Alex Coburn in this last issue, March 21st, or the one before last, and it is titled 4 Men in North Safe, the Use of Intellectuals. And that's a good word, intellectuals. The title is called Beat the Devil, which is a good title for his column. And Alex Coburn is referring to 4 people he refers to as the Nobel Prize winner, an East German refugee, and 2 of the most hyperactive bellboys of the Reagan era, Who are the four people he's talking about? And their names come up in regard to that C&G Foundation. That's the Gulf and Caribbean Foundation. If you have the Tower report, it's in Appendix C, and it mentions the Gulf and Caribbean Foundation. And the men he's talking about are Elie Weisel, Joachim Maitre, Max Singer, and Michael Ledeen, none other than Michael Ledeen. Now, many of you get Nation, and for those of you who don't, or even to share, even if you do, I'm going to do more on this next week. But I just want to call attention to it because I wrote to Elie Weisel about Fritz Kramer. He wrote me this blank letter, pass it off. Now it seems that the intellectual Elie Weisel, working with his friend Max Singer, the president of Boston University, is part of Ledeen's team to write an article praising the Sandinistas or the Contras and being a part of this holy war with the Moonies, the Knights of Malta. Weisel, who cries on television, please don't go to Bitburg, is repeating the Bitburg scenes, the Waffen-SS scenes down in Central America, working with these same people. The day he got his Nobel Peace Prize, peace in quotes, he went right off to Russia to kick Russian ass for civil rights, and now it turns out that Weisel is linked down here. Of course, the Israelis are, right and left and otherwise, and they have been linked to death squads, and Weisel had absolutely no interest in this man named Fritz Kramer when I wrote to him. I've had that response he had on the air before, and I'll share with you next week. But that's a good article, and Weisel and Wiesenthal are the epitome of the slimy snakes that they are, but don't shed their skin. They carry the whole weight of their rottenness with them, and someday the story of the Jewish traitors, the Judenrat that Hitler called them, the Jewish traitors who this time know better, who work with the likes of Licio Gelli and Francesco Pazienza and Stefano Delle, Chaiae, who approve of their actions, who let them set their foot into these countries and decimate native populations. These are the kind of people that are revered by those persons with a memory of the Holocaust, but with absolutely no glasses on to see the world as it is after Germany, in quotes, lost the war, to see it as it really is and wonder what are Ledeen, Jewish, Weisel, Elliott Abrams doing with these people with such a track record of killing, all in the name of anti-communism. Now, I want to get back and continue what I started last week about accuracy in media because this is very, very important. And I'll do the greater part of this program and maybe the next 2 weeks on that. Just as I put everything aside to do 2 broadcasts on Nicholas Daniloff, I want to do 2 or 3. As hard as it is to put the other articles away, I'm going to do it. Because this is a sounding board of portending the future, things that have happened in the past that we couldn't control. But this is right in our own area, so it's very, very important. And, of course, it affects me directly because David Emory up at KFJC has World Watchers on 4 times a week. Now, if the president of the university decides to stop their broadcasting, I will tell you now that I will continue broadcasting. If you're not within the listening area of Kazoo, write to me at any time they decide to stop their program One Step Beyond, if they decide, and you can get my tapes by subscription. And at that point, it's up to you individually to make copies and send to people because the avenues of education and instruction are obviously closing off. Now, I read this letter last week. I'm going to read it one more time. Dr. Tom Clement, President, Foothill College, Los Altos Hills, California. It was dated January the 27th. Dear President Clement, enclosed are the tapes and transcript of portions of them which I discussed with you on the phone. So he's been in touch with him. The transcript skips around and does not indicate where the breaks are. I did it for my own information rather than with the idea of providing it to you. It will give you a good idea of some of the more outrageous statements being made over KFJC. I will be interested to learn what action you take. Sincerely yours, Reed Irvine. Now, Reed Irvine has accuracy in academia and accuracy in media, and from his campus report, this is what he wrote about the program that Nip Tuck and David Emory put on. But keep in mind that we associate, Dave and I are very close, exchange information, and what we're putting on is similar. Our styles are different, and they're Reed Irvine is talking about David Emory. He's not mentioning Nip Tuck, interestingly enough, but David Emory, and not mentioning World Watchers, but singling out Dave. This is the way the article goes. Kooks on the loose, one step beyond sanity. Have you heard that the United States government may be engaged in an insidious plot to kill off political liberals, people involved in affirmative action programs, and people involved with helping the poor? Did you know that this was being done by somehow giving these people cancer so that they would appear to die of natural causes? If you don't know about this, it's because you haven't been tuning in to radio station KFJC, a station funded and operated by Foothill College of Los Altos Hills, California. He has the letters wrong, but I'm sure he knows what he's doing. He wrote it KFCJ. It's KFJC. Foothill is part of the California vast system of public higher education, located 35 miles south of San Francisco, serving Silicon Valley. Now, that's a good warning note that there is a vast system of public education, and Silicon Valley is one of the key words to security. Okay. Its FM radio station, run by students and by the college, is supposed to provide training in broadcasting to equip students to go out and get jobs in the real world. But the world, as seen from KFJC, is one that makes the conspiracy theories of Lyndon LaRouche seem tame by comparison. When it isn't broadcasting punk rock, it is airing kook talk. Two of its stars are Nip Tuck and David Emory, who host a regular talk show called One Step Beyond. It is at least one step beyond sanity. Campus Report has obtained a tape of a program that Tuck and Emory aired on November the 9th, and I understand a woman from the military in San Francisco sent it to Reed Irvine. It began with Emory discussing at length the obituary of Sylvia Jacobson, Affirmative Action Director for San Francisco Civil Service Commission, who just died of cancer at age 40. Jacobson had been highly praised by San Francisco Mayor Dianne Feinstein. Tuck and Emory were not interested so much in Jacobson's career as in the cause of her death at such an early age. Emory explained his interest, saying there are a lot of obituaries like this appearing in the newspaper, people who would appear to be political liberals, people who are involved with affirmative action programs, people who have been active on the behalf of black or minority organizations, people who have been active in liberal causes of all kinds, people who are involved in helping the poor, providing legal services for the poor, things of this kind. A lot of people like that in their late 30s or 40s and early 50s, the most productive period of people's lives, there are a lot of these obituaries appearing. And what we're asking is, how many of these people have been dispatched by the authorities? Now, I'll continue. Now, Reed Irvine is quoting David Emory, how many have been dispatched by the authorities. They're broadcast December 9th. And that is the key question. That is probably what was irking Reed Irvine, and he singled it out. He's got some other quotations, but I think the most untold story of this whole time period since World War II is the systematic elimination of people. A precedent was set in Germany with the murder of 400 people, politicians, all documented, who opposed the rise of fascism and had to be killed or were witnesses to those killings of the people who were aware of fascism in order to make Adolf Hitler be properly elected in 1933. Getting back to Reed Irvine, this is the way it goes. Emory continued, people may first be inclined to say, gosh, what a crazy idea, that our government might be going around assassinating political liberals by cancer. Well, we've looked at the facts, and it is a matter of fact that our own national security establishment has dispatched people of political persuasion, such as John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King. People like that have been gotten rid of in the past. It is not unreasonable to suppose that people who got rid of them would like to get rid of other people like them. While we focus on the Nazi element, it might seem crazy to people to think that the United States government might be assassinating people by cancer. But it is crazy to think that a bunch of Nazis might be willing to freely murder their political opponents. Obviously not. They don't make any bones about it. That's what we're getting into, and that's the reason we focus on the Reinhard Gehlen organization, the Waffen-SS, the Gestapo men who moved into our own intelligence system, shaped it to a large extent, as well as openly were sympathetic to pro-Nazi elements such as the World Anti-Communist League and with intersections to Western goals. Obviously, these people have a lot of power. I'll take a 1-minute break here and get back to those thoughts that David Emory was saying and show why Reed Irvine's porcupine sticks were up in the air and why it is important to him to try and stop this kind of broadcasting any longer. This is Mae Brussell. This is the second half of World Watch's program 799. And where I left off 1 minute ago, in case you picked it up in the middle, I'm reading a campus report written by Reed Irvine, who's president of Accuracy in Media and Accuracy in Academia. It was written to Dr. Tom Clement, president of Foothill College, Los Altos Hills. And in the report, Reed Irvine is using quotations of David Emory's from the program One Step Beyond. And I see why his feathers got ruffled, because David Emory was talking about the Gale organization and the SS Gestapo. And previously, just a little while ago, I talked about Stefano Delle Chaiae being arrested just yesterday, and he is one of the direct links of our government to the SS Gestapo, as is Klaus Barbie, who worked for the CIA, the CIC, and then the CIA, and I could go on and on. We've done broadcasts of those connections. Also, he noticed in his report to the president a section of David's broadcast where he referred to the World Anti-Communist League and to Western goals. And Reed Irvine is very close to the World Anti-Communist League and Western goals. He has board members of Accuracy in Media from Western goals and from the World Anti-Communist League, and I'll share those with you, the facts about that in a moment. But I can see why he got excited about this tape. He quoted David Emory on the broadcast saying, "They are very close to the Reagan administration, the World Anti-Communist League, Western goals, the Nazis, and for them, freely disposing of anybody whose views they don't care for is a matter of course." Now, you can just, the most recent documentation of getting rid of people who didn't like Ronald Reagan's views was the testimony of the FBI man in Texas who said that if people didn't like the administration's views, Ronald Reagan's administration views, they were to be sent back to El Salvador, and the death squads would be tipped off that they were arriving there, and they would be sent to certain death as payment for not liking the administration's views. Now, the article in Accuracy in Academia continues, quotes, and this is quoting David Emory, "One of the things we have focused on in these broadcasts is our intelligence system's attempts to develop means of assassination, which would mimic either disease or suicide or something else. Assassination by cancer is a fact," end quotes. Then he continues, Emory urges listeners to read obituaries and, quote, "see how many people are dying from supposed suicides, cancers, leukemias, in particular people like Sylvia Jacobson," end quote. Emory then attacked those such as Israel's intelligence service, the Mossad, who have charged the Soviets with encouraging and abetting terrorism. He said most of the actions can be blamed on the Soviets. They turned out to be our own operations in order to make the Soviets look bad in one way or another, the Pope shooting being one, end quotes. He said by ours, he meant Western intelligence agencies. Another key word that got his feathers up was the Mossad. That is the holy area. You can't write about that, talk about on the radio. The only one who's had the courage to write about the Mossad consistently with these intelligence teams has been Lyndon LaRouche, and he has now been forced to leave the country, and probably and unfortunately his publications will fold under, and many of you will never have the opportunity to read Executive Intelligence Review with issue after issue of the Mossad's links to the Defense Intelligence Agency, the CIA, the National Security Council, the death squads, and the horrendous stories that have been going on around the world with the assistance of the Mossad. Not alone, but doing it. That is a word you can't use and continue to write in this country or get on broadcasts of a large amount of listeners if you tap the Mossad. Now, going back to this article, he said that by ours he meant Western intelligence agencies, not specifically the U.S., although we're in there pitching, end quote. He said Gaddafi, the Pope shooting being just two of the elements that come to mind. the Olympics massacre, and others, end quote. Emory also charged that Gloria Steinem's MS magazine is essentially a CIA publication. He said its editor, Gloria Steinem, had been CIA for many years. Its first publisher was Elizabeth Forsling Harris, who planned Kennedy's motorcade route in Dallas, Texas, and was obviously up to her eyeballs in the assassination. One of the key stockholders of Ms. was Catherine Grant, whose affiliation with CIA and the Washington Post and Newsweek we discussed on Radio 88.1. One Step Beyond. That show is available from Davcor. Davcor is a tape duplication service that sells tapes of the broadcasts of Emory and Tuck on KFJC. Reed Irvine, chairman of Accuracy in Media and Academia, now this is the important part, asked Foothill College president Tom Clements if it would disturb him to learn that his radio station was airing charges that the government was practicing assassination by cancer, that it had killed John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and that the United States or Western intelligence agencies were behind the attempt to kill Pope John Paul II. Dr. Clements said it would indeed disturb him if KFGC was airing such statements, and if that is true, he would take action to see that it was stopped. He said there had been complaints about the station, but that there had been nothing this specific. The tapes and a partial transcript of Emory Tuck program have been sent to Dr. Clements. And, of course, I invite on the air, and I'm going to send a personal letter, I invite Dr. Clements, in the interest of fairness, let him be the judge, to come down to my home, and I will show him the file on the Pope and the Pope shooting, the drawers, not a file folder, but maybe 3 or 4 drawers of a filing cabinet. I will show him the research on the murder of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, and let him see if it isn't okay to air the situation that has been described as a major scandal by some, the killing of people like John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, and the attempted assassination plot on the Pope. Now, as far as cancer, I just pulled out of my file on medicine. I have 2 drawers and boxes full of articles, just at random, the few to share with you that I've had on World Watchers to give to the university president there in case he has any doubts about what's going on. One was August the 19th, 1985. This was program 716. I had on World Watchers from the Monterey Herald. Study due of inmates injected with cancer. More than 200 Ohio prison inmates 23 years ago were injected with cancer cells. New York City Medical Center is trying to locate them now. The 12-year study was done by Sloan Kettering as part of a federal National Cancer Institute funding to give them cancer cells. New York Times, July 14, 1984. Max Cutler, cancer expert, dies. Cutler, an expert in cancer research with Dr. Loyal Davis, that's Nancy Reagan's stepfather, in trying to treat cancer of the brain, inserted radium implanted directly into the diseased parts of the brain. Dr. Cutler worked as a Rockefeller Fellow in cancer research. There are 4 persons linked to 3 to the Rockefeller foundations, one a president of Rockefeller University, on the board of Accuracy in Media, and one from the Council of Foreign Relations set up by Rockefeller, but 3 directly from the Rockefeller Institute. One is Eugene Wigner from Western Gold, who is the right-hand man of Reverend Moon, and the other is Edward Teller, and the president of Rockefeller University is on the board of Accuracy in Media. Third article, this is Associated Press, November 8, 1979. Man receives death sentence in murder by cancer. 2 persons were poisoned with rocket fuel additive in lemonade and milk. It caused cancer. Mr. Harper stole the lethal substance from Epley Institute for Cancer Research, where he works as a lab assistant. How did he know it wouldn't cause cancer? Why would he put it in the milk and lemonade? And he received the death sentence because he knew how to cause cancer by putting it in food substances. So it has been perfected, and the Epley lab knows about that. Many of you remember these. I've had these on World Watchers. Washington Post, November 27, 1984. A Brooklyn study with elderly patients indicated they were injected with cancer cells. The purpose, to test the cancer cells or how they act. Why were they injected with them? But people on the wards who they felt, I guess it was the end of the line for them, maybe wanting to see how fast they grow, they were injected with cancer cells. Well, we know that there are 3-year cancers, such as Martha Mitchell had. There's 3-week cancers that Jack Ruby had. There's a 3-hour cancer where William Casey of the CIA had some seizures and goes right into the cancer ward. And, of course, they inserted radiation in his brain. And look how well he's doing. The Brooklyn State. Now, the last article, and I have many of these. I just want to give some items or examples about these matters. May the 24th, 1987, Washington Times. Man who first isolated cancer virus, dead at 84. Albert Claude, awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1974, isolated the first visible cancer virus in 1933. He had a picture of the cancer virus, and he helped create the science of cell biology with this cancer virus. Claude worked at the Institute for Cancer Research in Berlin, Germany. He next worked 18 years at the Rockefeller Institute in New York, of which he is a member. At least 4 members on the board of Accuracy in Media I mentioned are part of the Rockefeller Foundation. One is Eugene Wigner. The other is Edward Teller, who started his career with the Rockefeller Foundation. The third is Frederick Seitz, the president of Rockefeller University at the present time, and William Simon, who is a member of the CFR the Rockefeller set up, the Rockefeller family. So Mr. Reed Irvine doesn't like that talk of cancer because just 2 out of the 5 I selected here have something to do with the Rockefeller University. So, and as far as the terrorism, accusing the Mossad, accuse the Soviet Union of terrorism, where they are behind terrorism, I just want to quote Alexander Coburn from the Wall Street Journal, April 17th, 1986. He said, "The cult of terrorism is the abdication of political thought. Say the word terrorism, and in a familiar conditioning of reflex, people think Palestinians. Where is the sense of proportion? Between 1967 and 1982, that's a 5-year span, 282 Israelis were killed by Palestinian violence, versus 20,000 Palestinians were killed in Lebanon in the summer of 1982 alone, all in the name of a strike against terrorism." And don't take those figures lightly. We have terrorism, the death squads that we've set up, 50,000 in El Salvador, 36,000 in Honduras, another 70,000 in Guatemala. The intelligence communities have been working on those poor little countries in Central America and South America continuously. Terrorism isn't necessarily one country invading another, such as, say, the Soviet Union going to Afghanistan. Is terrorism? Granted. But what about American terrorism? It's totally disproportionate to what the media is telling you and the fact that the Mossad's involved in terrorism. Indeed it is, and a good many people died just in 1982 in Lebanon to attest for that. Now, as far as heart attacks, there was a matter here, a current heart attack that I want to share with you in detail before I continue with Accuracy in Media, pertinent to what Reed Irvine is saying. Keep in mind, as the Iran-Contra Gate story goes on, as it developed from the time Mr. Hassenfuss dropped in Nicaragua and escalated to the links of the Swiss banks run by Willard Zucker and these mysterious accounts, the Credit Suisse and the other banks, 3 people have died from the Central Intelligence Agency: Edward Lansdale, Santo Traficanta, and Mike Burke. All had associations with the Contras, all had associations with the Vatican, all with Richard Nixon, with the Bay of Pigs, with Ronald Reagan's teams, and with the Central Intelligence Agency. All 3 of those died in just the past month, one after the other. But the most interesting and current pertinent death, and I have a list of many deaths related to Contragate that have just come down since November, is that of Senator Edward Zorinsky, and he was described in the New York Times as the first Jew ever to win a statewide election in Nebraska in 1976. He died of a heart attack. Senator Edward Zorinsky died of a heart attack after performing at a press club gala in Omaha. He was 58 years old. In addition to leaving a major void in the Senate Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee, he was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where he headed a new subcommittee on terrorism, narcotics, international communications, and this has to do with Contragate. Zorinsky was singing the Great Pretender in a soft shoe dance on stage. He returned to the audience and was ill. He was pronounced dead a half hour later. Zorinsky, a Democrat, resisted the policies of the Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker. Now, Irvine worked for the Federal Reserve for 20 years. I must mention that. He was close to the Federal Reserve for 20 years before he formed Accuracy in Media. Zorinsky was fighting the policies of Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker. He said they were destroying his constituency. He was a long-standing critic of the National Endowment for Democracy, part of the Contragate and the Channel offices and North, and for the U.S. Information Agency. That's Mr. Zwick, the darling of Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan. They've both recently been exposed for their role with Oliver North's Project Democracy with private covert operations. As chairman of the newly created Subcommittee on International Narcotics Terrorism, he was going to pursue these investigations of Project Democracy and the USIA. Washington Post, March the 7th, 87. North's aides linked to Australia study. This is Oliver North's assistants are linked to the Nugan Bank. General Secord and other men, Thomas Klein, Theodore Shackley, are the focus of a Senate Foreign Relations Committee investigation. The Australian study of the Nugan Bank provides additional evidence that will help the committee determine whether this group simultaneously functioned over the years as the official government intelligence agents while they were allowed privately to conduct legal and illegal operations for their own profit. Given the recent revelations about these men, I am greatly concerned, said Senator Edward Zorinsky of Nebraska, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, hours before he died of a heart attack on Friday. He was getting the reports of the Nugan Bank, and you know the connections of that. If you take Western Goals and Reverend Moon and Nugan, you have the ball of wax that David and Nip and I have been talking about for many, many years. The Washington Post said Michael J. Hand from the Green Berets, from the military intelligence, served in Laos in the 1960s with Air America, which Eugene Hassafas also served in Laos with Air America. He took part in the movement by U.S. Navy of a spy vessel to the Iranian Navy in 1976. And George Bush was CIA director in 1976. The Washington Post goes on, Edwin Wilson, the CIA agent, was the head of a secret Navy intelligence group called Task Force 157. Now, Henry Kissinger was head of Task Force 157. Under him was Robert Keith Gray, who operates the Powerhouse, that public relations office that I said was an extension of the CIA, and George Bush headed Task Force 157 when these very people were being talked about. He was CIA director in 1976 and 1977, rather. George Bush was CIA director, and it continues while heading this Washington Times, the story of Zorinsky continues. While heading the Foreign Relations Subcommittee on Western Hemisphere Affairs, Zorinsky was surprised. He surprised his fellow conservatives in the Senate by supporting United States aid to Sandinista regime, not the Contras in Nicaragua. He argued that economic assistance to the government would keep Nicaragua out of the communist camp. Zorinsky was well known for his one-line jabs in Washington establishment. The administration has done to farming what Bonnie and Clyde did to the banking. So he's hitting George Bush's Task Force 157 that is up to his ears in death, in drug running, and connections of espionage. He was hitting the Federal Reserve. He was willing to send money to the Sandinistas, and his committee was getting the papers from Australia on the Nugan Bank when he dropped dead of a heart attack hours after he talked about the Nugan Bank and the people he was concerned about. Washington Post again, March the 7th. I'm greatly concerned, said Senator Zorinsky of Nebraska, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, hours before he died of a heart attack. Now, who replaced Zorinsky in Nebraska? He's a Democrat from the Senate, first Jew that is ever elected to a statewide election in Nebraska. Who replaced him? I'm quoting articles now. One's from the San Francisco Chronicle. We'll start with that one, March 17th. And I have 2 or 3 on the man who replaced him. David Carnes was selected by Governor Kay Orr to replace Senator Edward Zorinsky. The man she selected, Governor Orr, David Carnes is described in the front articles about him as, in quotes, a political novice, a political unknown. Appointing a Republican to replace a Democrat in the Senate now closes the edge to 54 Democrats and 46 Republicans. And if this is allowed to keep up, the edge will be equal and then over, and then be careful. The tally of the Senate is being noticed on the death of Mr. Zorinsky and the replacement of a Democrat with a Republican. Carnes is senior vice president and general counsel of an Omaha lumber and grain business, also chairman of the Federal Home Loan Bank in Topeka, Nebraska, and Colorado and Oklahoma, Topeka, Kansas. Carnes worked a short while in the White House on a fellowship in 1981. He's held no political office at all, and he's coming in as a senator. He was in the White House in 1981 with Housing and Urban Development Samuel Pierce, and you remember how controversial and do-nothing that particular position was. Elizabeth Carnes, his wife, previously worked for Barbara Bush, the wife of Vice President George Bush. Carnes described himself, and dig this, the former, her husband, Barbara Bush's husband, was the former head of Task Force 157, and Edward Zorinsky was going to investigate it. And Barbara Bush is a person who worked for her was Elizabeth Carnes, whose husband was appointed a Republican to take a Democratic seat in the Senate by the governor of the state of Nebraska, and she worked for Barbara Bush. Carnes described himself generally as a conservative. He thinks the arms to Iran was a mistake, but he believes that the rebels should be armed in Nicaragua. So there's a vote change now. Give the money to the rebels. He also supports a constitutional amendment to ban abortion. So when you, in Nebraska, vote a Jew or vote a Democrat, he can quickly be knocked down and replaced with a Republican who wants to arm the Contras, whose wife worked for George Bush, the very man who's mentioned in the Task Force 157 in the investigation of Nugan and the link to the Contra gates. Now, I just want to emphasize this again one more time. Zorinsky was to investigate Nugan Bank and Task Force 157 that involved Bush. He was replaced by a man after he died suddenly whose wife worked for Barbara Bush. And George Bush, on March the 14th, had a ceremony swearing in with about 30 congressmen, Republican senators in his office for Carnes. Bush did the swearing in himself, according to the Washington Post, as leading him to this Republican senator to replace that Democratic senator who would have been investigating these matters. So I think this is a very sorry state of affairs. Washington Times said, had a few more comments about Zorinsky and David Carnes, but I believe you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. Now, what kind of a heart attack was it? And before I did want to get into detail of the board of directors of Accuracy in Media. I broke that down this weekend and linked them to the corporations, the government, the intelligence community, and they've come up with a very absolute picture of an organization that is set to knock out the small professors, the small publications, the printed word, the radio programs that have an ounce of truth to them, who don't stand to lose because there's no sponsors, so he has to twist the wrist of the president of the university. Now, I have to go back again for you listeners who've heard it before and some who haven't, to the book Spooks by Jim Hogan, because it is pertinent. Just this one section in the book is filled with 400 or 500 pages of valuable material. It's pertinent to the question now of Reed Irvine putting down death by heart attacks and making fun of David Emory, and in lieu of the Zorinsky change. In the book Spooks, he describes how private persons use the Secret Service, the CIA, the FBI, recalled former, to guard them and take care of them, and he referred to a man he met named Paul Rothermill, who, with conversations with Peter Noyes, and Peter Noyes had tapped into Clay Shaw and the links of the assassins to John Kennedy to out into California as well as New Orleans, those connections. Peter Noyes interviewed Rothermill, who described his past association with the Hunt family of Texas. While employed in the Secret Service of the patriarch H.L. Hunt, Rothermill said that the old man's son, Nelson Bunker Hunt, approached him in connection with a plan to form a paramilitary group for political purposes, a killer force to train in the desert estates in the West, a connoisseur of horses and right-wing causes. Nelson Bunker Hunt is an important contributor to the John Birch Society, a confidant of Robert Welch. He's one of the world's richest men. He conceived of the idea, not only did he accumulate riches, but to organize the so-called American Volunteer Group, AVG, organized it with supposedly lethal intent. Hunt planned to recruit a private army from the ranks of General Edwin Walker's John Birch Society in Dallas. Now, Nelson Bunker Hunt is directly linked to Western Goals, to the Channel office. Larry McDonald of Western Goals was the president of the John Birch Society at the time he went down on the KAL. Western Goals went in the hands of the Channel offices that I'm referring to now with their various front organizations. And Nelson Bunker Hunt is a big funder of the Contras and the private armies that were sent to particularly Central and South America at a time when Congress said the money shouldn't be sent there. They do run their own armies and have a team that have gone back a long, long way. Now, the legal intent was, I say, to use General Walker, and from the ranks of General Walker, and I've cited in my article on John Kennedy assassination, the Nazi connections, how General Walker brought from Munich, Germany, 29 people into the Dallas-Fort Worth area, right to Robert Morris's home, a member of the John Birch Society, a man active with Reverend Moon today. So this is not far away from the plans that were made. And Mr. Rothermill refused the job, but that doesn't mean it was done. The plan was to use weapons with the virtue the victims would appear to have a heart attack. They referred to a gas gun that is used. They gave an example, always the KGB used it, but there'd be no noticeable trace. And then in the book Spooks, it continues on with reasons to believe that Mr. Hunt's efforts were linked to the Minutemen, to Robert Depew out to California, and those were indeed the links to Ronald Reagan and to the assassination team that did kill John Kennedy. But they go into the trailer that outfitted Electric Command Post and said that the AVG, that's the group that were to kill political people in this country, had a goal of 10,000 people that they would need to kill. All members of the Actions for Democratic Action and maybe 10 million others were targets. And this is a quotation of Robert Brown, who was put into business of Soldier of Fortune, the magazine that recruits the mercenaries, by none other than John Singlaub, on the board of Western Goals, very active with the Contras, in and out of the White House with Oliver North, so that the effort to give heart attacks was perfected a long time ago, and the stated purpose here was 10,000. In Germany, there were 400 deaths, and printed in Spooks a few years ago, the goal of these people was $10,000. 10,000 people. I think in terms of dollars, as I separate the Condragate story, it's easy to go off in terms of dollars. Now, the network for these operations for accuracy in media and Reed Irvine was set up, described again in the book The Last Hero, and I've used many, many times those pages from the end of the book, towards the end of the book, page 795, up through about 798, 799, that describe the corporation, first called American Canadian Corporation in May 45, that was set up with major countries, 37 countries, and over 500 or 600 businesses and corporations to take care of matters, as it were, after World War II, to make sure the world is safe for these major corporations. The company changed its name in 1947, but active in this company in the went from the WCC, the World Corporation, WCC, up to the British American Corporation, Canadian Corporation, from WCC to BACC, changed its name in 1947. Contributors to this were Alan M. Scaife of Pittsburgh and Sarah Mellon Scaife of Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh the family of the Mellons were active participants in this corporation that set up headquarters all over the world in the most prosperous countries and then the undeveloped countries. It was 47 foreign countries right after the war. So the point is that the Mellons are identified, as are many other people that I'll share with you, as being participants of funding accuracy in media. And there's no doubt that A. Reed Irvine, who came from the Federal Reserve Board, working there for 20 years or 24 years, would then go over to an organization and start a thing like Accuracy in Media in 1969, in September 69. In April of 1969, 68, Martin Luther King was killed. In June of 68, Robert Kennedy was killed. And there had been so much of the investigation of John Kennedy still brewing and not solved, and added the King death and the Robert Kennedy death, which would be so obvious to a few people, we hoped. There had to be an answer for people out in the boonies, the small colleges like Foothill College or any other small colleges where people are talking about the assassinations or the Nazi connections to the government. There had to be an organization that would come into the college classes, listen to the radio stations, and try to close them down, because we finally unlocked the keys of what fascism is and how it works. And Reed Irvine is a symptom of that fascism. And next week, I thought I'd have more time this week, I'm going into the board members on Accuracy in Media and their links, as I say, to the Rockefeller Foundations, to the Defense Department, and show that the perfect setup formed by former Secretary of State Dean Acheson with Reed Irvine in 1969 is now bringing the fruit of its efforts, and has a well-founded network to round up and silence those people that are telling the truth. My time is up now. I'll continue next week with more Inaccuracy of Media. This is Mae Brussell, and keep reading your articles in the paper. There's a lot of interesting things coming out right now.